Welcome to Let's Go Again, a podcast for the independent class where we contemplate the big questions like what is the artist's role in society? And we strategize for the smaller ones like how do I grow an audience when my posts reach literally 5 people a day? We'll tackle those ideas and everything in between. I'm your host, Courtney Romano, a writer and director in Providence, and your comrade in arms as we navigate this indie artist group project. My hope is that each episode is another chance for us to reset and figure out this path together, outside of the system and on our own terms. So, as they say on a set, let's go again. I loved this conversation with Joshua Morgan and Mike Labbadia so much because we just went right into it. We just jumped right into the thing, which I think is, how do we do this? How do we live our lives as artists and arts workers and human beings who need material benefits and comforts in life, food, shelter, things like this? And how do we make art? And, as I was kind of listening back to the conversation, because we had it a couple weeks ago, I realized that the ultimate question that we're asking in this conversation is, what is the path forward? Where do we go from here? Because we see that systems, institutions are not really for the working class artist, right? Like there are obviously outliers. There are people who become movie stars, but even movie stars are saying like the cost of maintaining the movie star machine is so big that I have to have a side hustle. I have to sell perfume or tequila or whatever. I think this is the reality of living in the country we live in at the time that we live in. However, I think there's another question that comes up when we're trying to answer, like, materially, how do we survive this as artists? Is the secondary question is, why do we need to survive? Why do we need to ask these questions about material function? Why do we need to figure out how to work as a collective or in these groups of collectives together? Why is it important to keep making art? And I mean, I think when I was younger, I might have said, well, self-expression is really important. And we each deserve to live our own lives and live our own dreams. And while I don't disagree with my younger self, I think that there's a more salient or pressing point to art. And that is the fact that art can give voice to the culture that we're in. And in so doing, has the ability to bypass the structures, the assumptions, the historical patterns that have kept working people, working class people, working artists quiet and contented, or at least if not contented, resigned. And I'm saying that not to say that I think every piece of art should be political. I don't think that every piece of art needs to teach a lesson. I don't believe in that. I have no lesson to teach anybody. I am new here, just like everybody else, and learning as I go. The very act of making art is a political act. It is not a capitalist act necessarily. I mean, it can be, but I think making art in general, if anyone went into any kind of artistic practice like I have as a writer, I'm sure, and as an actor before that, I'm sure people have said to you in your life, like, what's your backup plan? Like, how are you going to make money? There's an assumption, an implicit kind of quality to art making that it is inherently valuable, even if it's not valuable with capital, right? Even if you can't make money on it, it's still valuable. And just that distinction, I think, is political. To say, like, is art, and I don't know, I'm just saying this right now for the first time, but is art actually this cheat code to the system where we get to play inside the system, but not with the same rules? I don't know. That's a big question, and that's probably another podcast episode altogether. But this is the underlying question, I think, to this conversation with Joshua and Mike. And I think the answer to that question for me is that art is important. It's political. It's important. Just the act of its existence is political. I think my bottom line is that art is an implicit good for humanity, for culture, for society, and for individuals. That doesn't mean that it always functions well in capitalism or at all. And I think what I love about Joshua and Mike is that they are willing to have the material conversation. How do we Lee do this thing, and they're able to have the philosophical conversation. Why are we doing this thing? Why are we trying to get this thing done? Why do we want to be artists? Why do we have to be artists? Do we need to make money when we make art? Are there other ways to do what we're doing? Is this the best way to do what we're doing? They are unafraid and unabashed to go where all of these questions lead. And their podcast is the Creative Risk Podcast. They have done consulting through the artist strategy. They are teachers, they are actors, they are directors, they are writers. They are incredible, smart human beings. I highly suggest going over to their Patreon and listening to their podcasts on anywhere you listen to podcasts, to the Creative Risk Podcast. And I just so enjoyed this conversation because they are so willing to get into the trenches and figure this out. And I think that the people who are going to lead us through to the next generation of whatever it means to be an artist at this time in America are the ones who are willing to have these conversations and grapple and not just say, yes to everything, but imagine a future that is different. And in this conversation, we really do imagine a future that is somewhat different and somewhat unseen so far, at least on a mainstream mass scale. And so I'm not going to say too much more. I think this is an amazing episode. I feel really excited to listen back to the whole thing myself and hear what Mike and Joshua have to say, because they're doing some of the really good work. And I think this is going to be super valuable to anyone who is wondering, the system doesn't work for me. Being completely independent doesn't work for me. Is a third way possible? And this podcast episode talks about that third way. And I can't wait to hear what you think. All right, here we go. So I'm Italian too, and probably shouldn't say this, but like that rendition that Josh just said about like, oh no, the worst thing. But that's just our baseline.
That's a baseline. Thank you.
Because
everybody always says, I sometimes just go like, fuck, like just randomly.
Truly.
And people are always like, what? And it's like nothing. I'm just.
You're like, I saw a butterfly. Like
exactly.
I dropped my piece of mail.
Exactly.
You should watch Mike watching a show. It's actually amazing. Like Mike watching like a live, like if he's watching a play and if something whoa, hey,
yes,
oh,
yes. Wait. So my husband always tells me I am the best audience in the world, because I will cry at like any commercial that implies emotion. Even the crappy movies that I watch, I'm like, they tried really hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll get into it. Like, it's not even an intellectual point. Like, I will get into it. I will be like, oh no, they're going to go in the room. And Craig's like, this is the worst thing we've ever seen. I'm like, I know, but look,
we're here. We're alive.
Yeah.
Me constantly bemoaning my life is actually me loving my life.
When I hard agree, full stop. I understand you, and
thank you,
we
Courtney.
are the same.
This
I don't
is
know
for
if it's
paisans.
Is it? It's either.
I actually do think. Listen, every time I talk to Courtney,
I can't do this.
I
don't know how you do.
Courtney, I think I literally said this to you too. Like when we talked last time. And I'm like, I wish Mike was here for this. I think that the two of you like actually really do sync up when it comes to just like perspective. I don't mean that offensively, Courtney. So please don't take offense to
it. No, you know what? So wait, but listen. So I've been listening to your podcast like on a binge cycle lately, because I knew we were going to talk. And like, I go through it with you guys, where your podcast, I'll really binge it. And then I'll be all caught up and I'll take a break and I'll do something else. And then I'm so happy every time. I'm like, wait, there's more coming out. Like I go back and
there's more shit they're saying.
Oh, I don't know how you guys do it. But when I listen to it, Mike, the things that I hear that come up in your, like, as you guys are like grappling with like, what are we doing? What are we?
Because I'm a human and Joshua's a cyborg. So Joshua's a robot.
No, but like you're
called trauma, Mike.
You guys both have different ways into art. Like I haven't actually seen either of you do your acting work. So like I don't know.
Terrible.
That's a lame thing that I just said. How do I know? But I can sense from one artist to another, like you both come at it from different like portals and both equally beautiful and thoughtful and intentional. And Mike, I feel like your portal is like we've got to tell the truth about everything, and if something doesn't feel right, it's not going to work. Like, it's just not going to work. And then go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, it's
I
been
do think that's.
yeah.
I think she's right about that, Mike.
Well, I think what's because Joshua and I have been collaborating because we have this task of like we're working with North Carolina School of the Arts. We have this task of trying to we've been doing this for 5 years of trying to curricularize
Codify.
codify. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just some form of doing this of what it means to be an artist today. How do you help people? And it's what I appreciate what Joshua brings to the table, because we wouldn't get anything done without Joshua, because Joshua commits, right? So
Yes.
he'll commit to something and go, okay, that's what we're going with, and you need to do that. I recently, one of our many like cry sessions recently, I was my girlfriend was telling me about the Sylvia Plath quote, where or not quote, poem, where she's like under a fig tree or something, and she's watching, and each fig is like, oh, that's me as a successful writer, that's me married with kids, that's this version, and she's like trying to choose which fig, and while she like waits for the figs, while she tries to figure that out, they all rot and fall off the tree. And
Mm.
it's like what Joshua provides is what I think is really needed, which is like, okay, it's not perfect, let's go. And it's very hard for me to do that, because I also get caught up in a lot of more, not that Joshua doesn't at all, actually. I think I get caught up in more existential things, and to an extent. I don't know if you agree with that, Joshua. Like, I'm like, why, what's happening, what's my life, especially
Well, do you know
lately.
one of the things I'll tell you where I think you're right, but one of the things that I struggle with, that I think you and Courtney both have more perspective on, actually. I feel like I'm running out of time.
Sure.
And I don't just mean like, oh, my life's coming to an end. I mean, like, I am a maximalist when it comes to efficacy of my time. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, literally, as soon as I move through the house, like, oh, I'll pick up these socks and I'll close the door and I'll put that.
Yes.
Like, it's how my brain is constantly working. And
Yeah.
so I struggle to stop sometimes and go, okay, but wait, what and why? And I think both you and Courtney are more comfortable in that place than I am.
Well, what can be frustrating sometimes about working with Joshua, but it's good, is that sometimes it's like, let me just have my crisis, and I don't know right now.
Yeah.
And he goes to, like, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? How are we
Solve
going to
problems,
do something, solve problems?
Yeah.
And yeah, yes. And look, you need that. Like, you can't just, I've been floating, I feel like, in some respects, for a couple months, a little bit, trying to, because I had like a near mentee B, in some respects, and no big, literally, I just like, do something crazy right now, but and so but you need, it's about finding that balance. We've been talking a lot about this, about like, controlling things, and taking charge in life, and also like following,
following your
like,
impulses.
and sometimes just fall. Yeah. And that's a struggle, because I feel like I've been so like this for so long. It's like, but you can't just go all the
Yeah, yeah,
time,
yeah. Yeah,
you know.
you guys, this is like why I wanted to talk to you today about this specific topic, about like the idea of labels for artists, because like
Yeah.
what you guys are talking about and what you have been talking about for a long time, even when I know you've moved a bit away from the artist strategy and it's the creative risk world, and universe right now, cinematic universe.
Yeah.
But like even in the artist strategy where maybe you were taking more of like the like tactical approach, and the creative risk is maybe more of the theoretical approach potentially. And I always felt like you guys were grappling with like the real thing as opposed to the imagined thing. The imagined thing is like, I just want to get on Broadway and star in major motion pictures. And not to say that people can't do that, and not to say that there isn't power in like saying that that's what you want, but that's not a strategy towards something. And like the
Yeah.
balance is like, let me do things and let me
Right.
also not grip so tightly that I block other things from
Yes.
happening.
No,
And
yeah.
yeah.
No, I think that's for a few reasons, right? It's like, and our work has always been expansive, I would say, like, and but I think, frankly, Joshua and I, it was actually really our Trump episode that we did. I think for me was like a big sort of like awakening to kind of things we've always been saying, but always our work was still, even though it promoted independence and it used the industry sort of as a guiding post to sort of
Mhm.
build a more expansive artist brand. I think that what sort of Trump's election, amongst other things, sort of proves, at least to me, is sort of the end of technocracy, right? So the end
Mhm.
of, and so skilled labor, right? And
Mhm.
somewhat
Mhm.
experts. So like nobody cares, I think, these industries are collapsing all over the board. We're at a turning point now of either the next renaissance or sort of like the collapse of, you know this
Life.
world order life.
Right.
I think life will go on. It's just like, the
Yeah.
world order we know it as is
Yeah.
is sort of at the end. And as these industries collapse, right, as an industry collapses, I heard this quote from Matthew Pines. He talks about like when industries are very strong, linear thinking is good
Mhm.
because there's a clear bureaucracy to climb up. But when an industry collapses, which I think a lot of artistic, you sort of old world legacy artistic institutions are collapsing.
Mhm.
If you think linearly, if you're trying to like get an agent when like there's no acting jobs, I mean, we see the breakdowns. It's like, you're barking up the wrong tree. It's like, but lateral thinkers, people who are able to sort of, expand their mindset and be more mission driven, and have a more expansive mission about art, their art in general, they can be flexible, sort of as what you're saying, of like when things come up, they're able to adapt to that. And so, just to be very clear, what we're talking about is like, specialized artistic skill sets as jobs, filmmaker, actor, dancer, painter, whatever. When industries were strong, those could be vocations. I am unsure if those alone can be vocations. And with the rise of social media and all of this stuff, and people want authenticity, they want
Right.
people more than they want
Yeah.
a job, or like, this is what I do with my life.
Yes.
The artist has to consider not just their skills, but like who they are as a, for lack of a way of putting it, brand. You know what I mean?
Context.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
okay, so this is my thesis, and I want you guys. I basically want to say this thesis, and then I'll remove myself. You guys just keep recording until you're done.
No.
But but what exactly what you're talking about? So this is the thing that I think is I I I I cringe so existentially when I hear people say, just make a movie with the phone in your pocket. Like, I can't stand people saying that because, like, like, that's been like a thing that people have said for like 10 years, right? Like, ever since, 2008 or whatever. That's more than 10 years ago. But like when the phones came out and they started doing things, and you're like, there's no, like, Steven Spielberg's out there saying, like, there's no reason that you can't just make a movie with the phone in your pocket. It's like, okay, so here's my take on that. Art, for me, everyone, to each her own. But for me, art is a combination of the art, the artist, and the audience. And it's those three things working together that create the product of art. I don't mean product in the capitalist sense. I mean like the project of art. What are we doing here? Right? What is this project? It's the three of those things coming together. And that's not to say that you can't like make art in your home. Like I've made art for no other reason other than to just make it for myself before, but that's just something else, right? That's what I'm not talking about. I'm talking about art that wants to be living in the world and running around in the world. So when people are saying you can make a film with the phone in your pocket, I'm like, yeah, but you can't market it with the phone in your pocket. Like movie studios spend 50% of their budget on P&A, which is print and advertising, which is marketing. So half of a studio budget is spent on the film and half is spent on marketing the film, right? So we're sold this idea that you have a phone in your pocket, you can do whatever you want. Everything's democratized, which of course it's not, because like democracy would mean that everyone has equal like say, and the platforms have the say. The platforms have the data. The platforms have like all the control, right? They can take they have the followers, they have the email addresses most of the time, yada yada. So we're at this point where it's like, okay, we need the platforms to create context so that our art can get out and can reach the audience, so we can do the social good or the social, the cultural exploration that it wants
When you say
to
they
do.
need to have context so they can you just what do you mean by that? Like,
because like okay, all right, context. I've been thinking about context a lot. Context is like, for me, it's like if I tell you that I went to Yale Drama School, I didn't. But if I told you that, you would have context for me, right? You'd be like, oh, it's like I was just talking to someone about heuristics and like the shorthand that we have for things like, oh, I get you because you're aligned with this institution. I get you because you've been on Broadway. I get you because you do classical acting, not commercial acting. I get you. You're in this context. But for independent artists who are making stuff on their phones, right? You are floating in space. You are decontextualized all the time. And so the work becomes to contextualize yourself constantly. And that is like marketing, right? But it's like a grind because it's you and a whole bunch of other people who are also trying to contextualize their work. So this idea that I've been like really intrigued by lately, and it's not my idea. I've been like looking at this platform called Meta Label, which is a I can tell you about it later and I'll link it in the show notes. I talk about it on every podcast that I'm in, so I feel like everyone knows it by this time if they're listening to these. But just to say where the ideas come from is this idea that each artist is their own kind of like like their own kind of individual, and that coming together as a label, as opposed to a studio, as opposed to a big institution, or as opposed to like the individual who's just going to like forge their path on their own, like that coming together as a label is the context that audiences need to really receive the work, and not only just receive the work as like a collective making a work, but putting each of those individual artists in context of the collective, right? So like, let's say we make something together, the three of us, and we put that out. That's the context for each of us individually then to be like, oh, that's, Mike from this collective. And now I can see Mike a little bit more clearly. Now his work kind of cuts through because I can contextualize it because of this label, this group.
I guess okay, but just for point of clarification, by way of a thought of what I think I hear you talking about, and you'll tell me, because Mike, that we have been talking about this, and just to say that one of the things that Mike and I were talking about is we sort of live in this moment where the actual business of the individual is to self-actualize online, to grow a community, and then sell. Because of your self-actualization, that also reveals whatever the product is,
Right.
which we think is a really amazing comparison for artists, actually, who are making their art, who are self-actualizing. But in a lot of ways, so let me just get to the thing that I think you're kind of getting at in terms of what the context, which is point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the artist has a point of view, that becomes the label. The label isn't as you're saying, the dancer, the actor. The label is,
Yeah.
Jeremy O'Harris, when he did Slave Play in particular, and that was a strong point of view that put him on the map as sort of this progressive radical, whatever I don't know. I don't have those labels for him, but that point of view was so strong. The play had such a strong point of view, let him to permeate and now make all kinds of fucking art. So that to me is what I think you're talking about. But am I?
Yeah. Well, I think what I'm taking, and I want to tie it into point of view, is when you say you can make a movie on your phone. What's the context behind that? In the sense of, like, you can make a feature film that goes to Sundance and does all these things, and it's like, I love movies, so what I'm about to say is not true, but it's like, okay, well, why does that have to be a movie you make with your phone, right? We have like these contexts of like how an artist's career is supposed to go. You're legit if you make a movie, which you can do, but why don't we blow up the idea of movie? Not to be, it's like all the context behind that and what it means to make a movie and all the things that are supposed to happen when you make a movie. It's like what I'm hearing you say is, it's like, and this happens all the time. Josh and I often talk about, and I'm sorry to take it personal, but like what I take away too from what you're saying is, like, I think I'm a very different kind of actor, right? So I think that, I think people who work with me, who give me a shot, love working with me, but I'm often an unsafe choice in some respects. And but we always talk about, well, if I want to, but I want to be an off Broadway, I want to be a staple in the New York theater scene if I could. And so how do I create the context, and why is that the context that I'm like holding myself to? It's like it's all the shit around the product, that all of these labels that we put on that sort of limit.
Well, I have to say this because I think this is kind of, there's a big fucking clog in this that I think is hard to delineate. Because what you just said, Mike, is something that I think is sort of really at play here. There's the version where we're like, you're an independent artist, I'm making my own work, but also really relying on the industry to move it along. Let's be clear. Where, to your point of becoming like an off-Broadway staple, you're going like, I'm doing all this so that I can get to the cloud part where I'm just carried. And I would argue, to be 100, Mike, that as much as we talk about a lot of other shit, we do rely on elements of that, just to be a 100, just to say. And then there really is the, Courtney, I think you're doing this. I think someone like Betsy Brown is a great example of people who are really focusing on self-distribution, who are really going, okay, I'm not looking to get to the level just to get to where the industry, I can get swept away like with the rest of the salmon. Do you see what I'm saying about the two
One
big
thing I just want to say,
here?
sorry to one thing I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney, is maybe I'm taking this almost too far. What was a podcast? There was no context. I guess radio. It's like innovators are people who break out of all who break out of context, or break out of. So it's like a lot of independent artists maybe are not relying on the industry, but they're still using industry context in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's shorthand that you can use, right? There's shorthand. And let me be clear too, when I say label, I don't mean like how we label ourselves. I mean like a record label. I mean, like,
Okay.
Right. I wasn't clear. A term that I've heard is ideological squatting up. Ideologically squatting up, right? So, Joshua, you're saying it's point of view? Yes, 100%. So I'm saying like it's all of our points of view converge in this one particular area, and we decide in that one particular area, the squad, the collective, the you know the individual components of this label, are going to come together and say we're going to produce this thing, right? So
What's
we're
the
going to
difference between that and a production? No, I just want because I love
yes.
this. What's the difference between like that and like a production company?
Okay, so a production company, I would say, has one person at the helm, and in a label, in like this kind of ideological thing. I think that there's one person who is like if we all did this, like Joshua would be like, you guys, we're meeting on Thursday, like be there, be square. Like there's like these roles emerge. I'm not saying the roles aren't there, but there's like in this kind of collective work, it's it's taking it's taking all these individual artists and putting them next to each other like you're in a gallery and saying, look at all of these different artists together. And the gallery space is the label, right? The gallery space is the container to understand what this art means because we're putting it next to each other. So the production company is like a facsimile of a studio, right? We've got a bottom line, we are selling something. A production company is like sometimes doing commercial work so they can fund narrative work. Like
it's more structural than anything else.
Well,
It's more of a business structure in order to, as opposed to being like even a brand or
a scene.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you both your opinions on Mike. I said this to you, so you might remember this. This was years ago that I said something to you about this, but I'm going to say the idea now because I don't really actually care, and I actually think your idea is really actually makes this more of an open marketplace in a really interesting way. But one of the things I've always loved about commercializing art, and this is going to come back to this idea of collective. You said art, audience, and what was the third you said, Courtney?
Artist.
So one of the things that I love about commercializing art is the consideration of who it's for. And then the compromise. I think the compromise is interesting. And Mike, again, we had this conversation years ago. The idea of like a manufacturing for art in this way. Someone comes in with an idea and says, I want to tell the story of the separation of North Korea and South Korea, whatever. I just am really fascinated by that. Oh, you know what? That'd be really interesting as an a cappella choir. Just go with me.
Exactly.
What do you mean? Oh, well, there's this annual competition. Okay, well, then we're going to go build that story through an a cappella choir, and that piece of art becomes best formulated in that context.
That's what I'm taking away, definitely.
Oh, okay.
Too, in addition to like, I love that because before, when it comes to sort of forming some sort of collective, or because I think what's interesting was that it's talking about, well, what's the benefits of doing something like that as opposed to growing a more personal individual brand? And I am curious about that. But one thing that I think Joshua just hit on, and before we leave context as an idea, is you have to build, I would argue, again, let's assume Hollywood, Broadway, all institutional structure went away tomorrow. What structurally is going to be built for the future?
Exactly.
Because what you're talking about in terms of like context is structural context in some ways.
Right.
I'm associated with these institutions or with these groups of people that are established. And so if we assumed that movies didn't exist, or Hollywood didn't exist, or the indie film market because by the way, I would argue, and I'm not trying to be, is that like these things are going to become much harder to break into because of their size, their I was going to say girth, you know, their because their bloatedness in this
Yeah.
moment, and as things become more efficient with AI. So
Mhm.
who could have predicted, right? Like, you know, something like Instagram or
Mhm.
something like social media. Somebody had to invent a new structural context and
Right.
idea. And do like that did not exist before. And so what I like about what you're saying is a good way to build structural context for something that people do not recognize. And in this moment where it's really the wide open world in the Wild West, to build that structural context, you probably do need, I don't want to say an organization, because I don't think that's what you're saying. You need a group. You need structural. You need some sort of structural not alignment, but association with something, so people can put it into context.
Yeah, you need an organizing idea, right? Like, what is the
Yes.
organizational idea? Is the idea if Mike does a one-man show and I have a audiobook, I don't know, and Joshua has a maybe like a commercial
Korean
piece
acapella choir.
Korean acapella choir.
On OnlyFans.
Of course.
I play all the members.
That is never mind. Never mind. Honestly, go with that. Go with that. If we have all of these different things that don't necessarily relate to each other, the organizational principle there is the idea, is the
Right.
fact that maybe we are all
Yes.
maybe we're all talking about independence in some way, but also maybe not. Maybe we just all have that kind of like independent spirit in what we do, and the narrative or the like
But Courtney, that's why I'm saying, what if the organizing idea, and I'm just saying that for me it was commercialization of art.
yeah.
I understand if that's not the vibe, but to me, that's a good example of a principle where I'll be clear what I mean by that. How does this make money?
Yes, can I tell you?
Yeah.
Okay, again, I am not an affiliate for Meta Label, but this is a platform where you come on, like,
She's
honestly,
FBI. Wait, Mike. Let me say
She's
Courtney
FBI. Did you just say
Listen,
Courtney's FBI?
100. She is CIA or FBI.
FBI.
We love her, but I'm telling you, there is some deep state shit here. She's coming for you. That ancient alien
Yeah,
bullshit. I'm telling you,
she saw my
she's on
Twitter. That's
to
the
you.
Meta Label.
She is
I'm gonna
on to you.
I'm gonna end up in a reprogramming
Court.
camp. I'm just
what does
Court.
it mean I'm
Meta
FBI?
label.
What
You
does
and
it
Mark
mean?
Zuckerberg is coming up behind you.
Oh my gosh, no, I'm not in the same room as that guy.
He's
kidding.
just
I'm
joking.
just kidding.
That's funny. Though.
Wait, are you calling me institutionalized? Because I
I'm
am
actually
heavily
let me say
It's
this. This is because it's interesting and related. There's I swear to God, and then I swear we'll come back to the point about commercializing and the unifying. I thought on my old theater company there was a board member. I'm not going to say the name, but there's a board member who
John Podesta.
Yeah, I was trying to think of someone in the FBI
who always traveled the world and solo, and had a kid, but was like a single older woman, traveled all over and would go to the Middle East and Australia on long trips, and would always travel with other men, but you wouldn't really know who they were. And there'd be pictures, and I had a great time. And it was the one other person in my life who everyone's like, I'm pretty sure it's CIA. Literally, people say like, no, that's CIA. And Courtney, like the second you just said it, like I'm just saying, like it's actually a compliment because you're so smart. Oh, and she did work for the Postal Service, and that was another clue. So you're just so smart, but I just mean it as a compliment. You're so interesting.
How do you monetize it?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
To the government? No, I'm just joking.
I'll tell you if you come with me behind this door into this room.
Exactly.
Leave your phone outside.
Just take this
anyway,
truth serum.
Yeah, exactly. No, so again, I'm not an affiliate of this platform, but I think it is. I'm just like really turned on by it because I'm like, oh my God, nothing makes sense to me, and that actually makes sense. So Meta Label is this platform where you can make as many labels as you want. So like we could do a queen's bird, we could do a, king's bird, like whatever, right? Like as many as you
A
want.
them's bird.
A them's bird, that's right. And it all goes, and you upload like a release of like whatever you're making, right? And you have collaborators on it, you add contributors to it, and you add what the payout is. And you say like, okay, each person gets 5% of the profits, or it's an equal split, or Courtney is doing most of the work and we're contributing, so she's going to get 30%, and then the rest of the 70% is split. So the idea in my mind with this is that you work on projects, right? And like, it's not to say that you're always working in the collective together. It's not saying that at all. But what it is saying is like, you work on a project together that is ideologically aligned for each of your individual brands. And then you go off and do all your other shit that you're doing, right? Like, you don't have to be just part of the collective. In fact, like being an individual gives more context to the collective. The context of the collective gives more or the collective gives more context to the individual.
Can I ask a question about this? I'm curious to hear about the split piece too, but you know what I'm taking from this, Joshua? And I don't know if this is what Meta Label does, but what can be really hard is, especially if as an independent artist, which look, that is the label, you're onto it, and it's like, I'm doing right now. Okay, so I have a web series, I have a play that I have a producer interested in. I'm also trying to develop educational curriculum for a theater company. I'm also doing the Creative Risk podcast. I'm doing and I hung out with Kathy, who I hope hears this, and she asked me a really good question, and she was like, so what are you doing? Like, not in the sense of like in a disparaging way, but sort of like a directional thing. And as an independent artist, you're kind of latching on to so many fucking things and so many what can feel like disparate pieces. And so how do you craft something, a vision, a brand, whatever the fuck, that can encompass all of these different pieces?
I think it's the wrong question.
Yeah.
I think the question, I don't think we need to encompass everything. I think we need to look at, I think, what's cool? You listed all those projects you're doing. I'm like, who's Mike? Like, in my audience mind, I'm like, who is that person who does all that stuff? I don't need it all to make sense at all. In fact, like, this is another conversation I've been having a lot lately. The less you make sense, the more formidable you are against AI. Like, make complete and utter nonsense. Don't make sense.
I agree with that.
Well, this is where there's a real consistency of thought, I think, amongst all of us, but especially, again, this is kind of what I mean. I was looking at this, a Meta Label. It's very interesting. It is super fascinating. And I would argue, actually,
it's been scanned.
In fact, exactly. No, but I think there's a real and I think there's a similar to what I was just talking about in terms of like a creative funnel of like, okay, I have a thought, and where can it go to become creative? Because part of what I love about what you're saying, Courtney, too, is in this moment of this renaissance, Mike, that you're speaking about, we're all sort of looking at this going, okay, how the fuck is this going to work? How are we going to make and distribute and grow an audience? And when you're talking about the point of view, actually, here's why this is really interesting, and maybe even as a step before what Mike and I were saying. Most of the artists that we have worked with for years actually don't understand the point of view. And actually, let me be clear. I am someone with a strong point of view, and I don't think I understand my creative point of view. Because I've long been, as many as have been, primarily an interpretive artist. And yet, this is what's fascinating. I was just on with a designer yesterday. When I'm specifically directing things, I have very clear points of view where I, very strong ideas and principles. I say all this because you have to get into the fucking making. Yes. And also to understand what the point of view is. And something like this could be a place to go, well, what am I trying to create and why?
Let me ask you a question, Courtney, because one thing I'm a little, I actually completely agree with you about not making sense about. I actually think that, brand confusion is not really a thing anymore, especially because there's more an investment in, because anything that's too um curated feels like produced, it feels inauthentic, whatever. My question is okay, take all of these ideas, right? So all of these different things I have going on. What then do I need an organizing principle to put it in context for myself? Because to find context, do I need, because that's what I struggle with sometimes, right? Is is when you have a lot of, and I completely agree with you about project driven just doing things, just
Mhm.
fucking doing things, making things. What an organizing principle, I don't know, I feel like could help one do is provide the context, but like, of like, well, this is who I am and this is what I do. But I
Yeah.
kind of am with you that I don't know if that's quite right. So then how does one organize these sort of disparate pieces? You
Yeah.
know what I
So
mean?
I do know what you mean. I actually just think like Mike Labbadia is the organizing principle. You are. It's you. It comes from you.
Yeah.
So you want to do it. Now, there's another level to what I think you're asking, which is about prioritization. What do I
Yeah.
do? How do I do it? How to Joshua's the king, to the to our Lord and Savior Joshua Morgan. Like how can I have the most efficacy in what I'm doing, right? You don't want to just like I think especially because I mean I moved out of New York, but I'm still a New Yorker. Like a lot of New Yorkers are like, but like let's get things moving, right? So like I can do projects and I can be the organizing principle, but like to what end? And I think the organizing principle there is just for me, it's like when I figure out like what project I need to do next, it's just like, well, what's going to move the needle the furthest right now? Like what's going to get me closer to whatever it is I want. And whatever it is I want, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's like prestige, sometimes it's uh like what I think might give me a new opportunity or open up a new
Sure.
doors. And sometimes it's just like I want to have fun. Like I'm so bored and I want to just like do something just
Yeah.
ridiculous and dumb and like fun for me. And
Yeah.
so I think like what I like about the idea of coming together with other individuals like
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
is that like it almost sounds like a labor union in a way, but like it's not that. But like it has the quality of we're each very important. We each have the shit going on that we have. We have these needs, and we're going to organize together in
Yes.
order to create something that doesn't depend on or doesn't just depend on these institutions that like frankly don't pay that well, right? Like the institutional, like I've never been on Broadway, but like I look at the minimums and I'm like, how? Like 8 times a week for that? Like come on, like pay. I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the Screenwriters Life podcast yesterday, and these are people who work at Pixar and like have shows produced on Apple, and the woman who has her show produced on Apple is like, I'm broke. Like this is not, and that's not surprising, right? Like we've heard that a million times.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that like labels solve for that. I think like political policy solves for that. But do I think that there's agency and like yeah, just agency and power in like organizing individuals together towards a specific
Fascinating.
project end? Yeah, I
Well,
think that's an interesting
I,
place to go.
I wanted to say, Mike, first of all, this is, I'm not, I don't want to, what I find interesting about this conversation is that this is what we were talking about with the
Yeah.
collective idea.
Yes.
I just want to be clear
What's the
because
collective idea?
well, I don't even mind. Listen, where we're very aligned here is knowing that we're at a big fork in the road moment. As things are collapsing around us, we're trying to figure out as this whole conversation, what do we do next? Do we create and try to funnel in, or do we essentially rebuild? And the collective idea that Mike and I were talking about, I mean, I'll just, we were talking about a great group of artists, basically, is what we were saying. The people, and it being quite private and small and starting
Yes.
insularly in a way that
Yes.
goes, okay, let's start to talk, let's start to create,
That's
and
it.
and
Mhm.
so and the reason why I'm highlighting this point,
Yeah.
Mike, is because really fascinating that Courtney from the U.S. government is in the same but that we're all having that is having this
Well,
conversation. But the
yeah.
one thing I just want to say, the final point I want to make, and that we've also been talking about, but I think is really important to highlight, is the importance of collaboration. That we have to,
Yeah.
and community, that we have to do it together, that we can't, it's one thing if we like little, if the Betsy Browns, the people just go out and kind of do it. But what if, yes, collectively we were helping and going, well, you know what I can do, and I can do that, and then you can come and da. And I think it creates a bit of a movement, period.
Well, let me tell you what I think. You brought up what it doesn't do. Well, what it does do is help you not rely on institutions. I'm going to take it on another thing is not rely on the individual. What I mean
Mhm.
by that is, per your point, I think what Josh and I consistently talk about, and I don't think this is. I think a lot of people don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years, and so without that context, a lot of people are floating,
Hesitant.
or they don't know, or
Yes.
they're hesitant, or they don't know what to do. And so that's especially for artists as emotional creatures and intuitive creatures, it's constantly shifting. But
Mhm.
what I appreciate about this idea of a collective, a community, whatever, is yes, Courtney may want to go to the trampoline park today, or she wants to work on this thing with money or whatever, but there's still accountability to move the things that the collective has agreed on. Because without me and Josh are doing creative risk artist strategy together, it wouldn't have happened, at least on my end, because even if I didn't always feel like it, I was accountable to somebody else. And that's what made sure that these projects don't die, is when
Mhm.
you have
Mhm.
that structural reality of you have people who are waiting to hear from you, who are saying, hey, how's this going? And in this moment where so much has to be self-generated as an individual, and that can be
Mhm. Mhm.
that's very hard to do. And that's why
Yeah.
that, and money, it's like that's why very few people as individuals are going to succeed, is because it requires so much exorbitant amount of resiliency and exorbience as an individual to
Exorbiance.
move through. But if say again,
Is it exorbiance? What's exorbiance?
exorbitant amount of, maybe it's a
Exorbitant.
word, exorbitant.
E exorbitant. Yeah. But I was with you. Ignore the
Yeah,
king.
whatever. Yeah, whatever.
Sorry, I'm not trying to fuck it up.
No, go ahead. I had to tell a story about Perrier later. What my first memory with Joshua.
What are you talking about? I don't remember that at all.
Never mind. But what I'm saying is that if you have a community, and that's the thing, is you have to find a right group of people, because
Mhm.
you have to care enough about the projects that community is working
Uh-huh.
on,
Uh-huh.
enough where it's like, I may be stressed about money
Right.
and trying to figure out how I'm going to make money, but Joshua is always gonna be there to remind me or hold me accountable to the group project we have agreed on.
And
and,
he
and
knows I
maybe
will.
Josh, yeah, and Joshua maybe is like, oh, he's doing a play over here, and so that's taking his time. But if I care enough about this project we're working on, I will always be a consistent sort of structural touchstone to bring him back to those other priorities that we have as a group. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, and yes, and um, I feel that not only is it tactically like helpful, right, to work in tandem with other people, but it's also ideologically reinforcing. It's like when I
Yeah.
say I believe in something and then I have seven other people who also agree, and we have these like deep kind of like theoretical conversations about like, well, what does that look like? What does that really mean? This is what I'm grappling with, and not just like at the large existential level, right? But just like I'm trying to do something with my life here. Like Joshua, you were saying earlier, I feel like I'm running out of time. I always feel like I'm running out of time. Like that, you even talking, speaking to that point is like reinforcing to me to be like, yes, that is, I see myself. I see that experience. And I think what happens sometimes in institutions is we get swallowed by the ideology there, and we like are trying to um be cool and like get in, and like that's fine. Like I'm not like anti-institution, believe it or not. Like I am not. I just want the institutions to work for people instead of for 5 people. Like I want it to work for everyone. But just to stay on my point, like I think that when artists who are working independently, but like every artist is working independently because that's the world we live in now, right? I think when artists feel reinforced in what they believe and what they think is true and the things that they think are fun, I think there's a self-motivating thing that happens that is a flywheel that like can't be stopped at a certain point. It can't be stopped.
Well,
I have a question.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Well, no, I just wasn't because one thing I just want to lift up about what you're saying is, Joshua, Joshua and I will often get into the weeds, and sometimes we're like, should we do this? Should we do that? And Joshua always says, and I agree, it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's about our collaboration, whether it's creative risk, whether it's artist strategy, whether it's, selling our feet on, a
Right.
website, which is joking,
Right.
but it's like
Well,
whatever it is that we're
share it.
doing collectively and collaborating on, it's about our collaboration, right? And so and so what I'm appreciating about what you're saying is that taking it back to that root cause. But the question I have remains in this hypothetical form. So we're a group of 6 artists that each have projects or things we're working on that we really believe in, providing support, providing no. Joshua comes to me with Streetcar. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of this? Or what do you think about, and he's directing it at a theater. I think this. How do you think I could do this over here? Maybe take it to this theater. Okay. How does money, now I'm going to take it to money, the
Please.
sustainability piece is like Joshua, depending on how much I contributed to Joshua's project, I get or maybe we worked on it together, but let's just say hypothetically it's quote his project and he's using the collective as a way to lift it up, brainstorm, whatever. Do I take like a 2% cut of like the money he makes doing it, depending on how much I contributed, or 1%? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that sort of the model?
Well, I actually think kind of, but I actually think it is even the collective, even the label itself is project based. So if Joshua is asking like, "Hey, what's your thought on this?" Maybe that's just like giving feedback to another artist, but maybe if he's
Right.
saying, "I want to bring you on as an associate on this," then like, yeah, like or a consultant on this, then like, yeah, that's a fee structure. But like what I think about creating these collectives is not that, like, the idea would be you make a project together that you all believe in. It could be in any container. It could be a podcast series, it could be a book, it could be you know a zip file of like 5 different iterations of one idea through like written and audio and visual and storyboard. It could be like anything, right? Like but it's a container, it's a project. You all work on it, you split the funds however you guys decide to do it, and then whatever maybe you say, like, we're each gonna take 5%, and then the other 70% that's left over is going to go to our next project together. And then you start funding things, right? And so, like, I don't think that there's a right or I don't think there's a I don't I think it's project dependent, because I think everything is project
Sure.
dependent. But I
Well,
think that there are ways to do it. And also, I just want to say, to make sure that I say this, like, I don't think you have to remove yourself from any institution to be able to do this. And in fact, I think you become more interesting and alluring to institutions because of your own contextualization within the collective and the label.
the two things I just want to speak to that when you were saying before that I think is really interesting is the idea of self-motivation, meaning this idea that and how it relates to this, and Mike and I talk about this a lot. It kind of goes back to your Mike point about being maybe a bit structure free and following your impulses. Because Mike and I have been having conversations about when I used to run my theater company, it was like it was nuts. So I mean, nonstop, every day, hours, crazy. I mean, and you just bent over backwards, and there was never enough. You had to fundraise more. Everything was more and more and more. But there was many fires, and Mike was like, well, you were sort of just going on drive. And that's true. And because we were all so deeply passionate about seeing it through. And I think there is something to be said for self-creating, and we all have been there, especially the three of us, when we really cared about something enough and would do anything to get it done and put ourselves in that line of fire. The second thing I just want to say, though, Courtney, I hear what you're talking about in terms of but it's a follow-up question I have in terms of the collective and a lot of the goods that come out of it. The question that I have is, if you use the metric for, well, what is the goal, right?
Mhm.
And if it was to make money, the whole conceit is great, whatever it is, as long as it makes money. And does it fuck it up? Because I could see that's a horrible thing to say.
Well, I'm going to make an argument for that really briefly, because
Okay.
what I'm taking about from this, Courtney, that I actually think is, we pay an agent 10% for negotiating a contract one time. If I have six, or because what I can see the only snag in us being we have to collaborate as a collective on all our projects is that I may love a thing that you don't love, and maybe you don't want to be a part of as part of the collective. But if we are a part of collective, and you are, and I use heavily that collective to help me figure out, again, what the organizing principle could be, is how it can feed money back into the collective. Even if you're not directly on the creative team or working on it in some respect, if I'm like meeting every 3 days with the group to sort of help me strategize and help me figure out, and maybe a couple of those people are directly, I mean, the hope would be, right, is that like those people would work on it. I think that's kind of interesting, because it's like, I pay an agent, agent's part of my team. Well, what if my team is, Queensburg Collective? That's actually my team. That helps me realize creative projects we work on collectively, but also my individual creative projects, and my sort of my commitment to the group is to show up equally for those artists and their creative projects, whether I'm working on them or not, but also to try and make money for the collective. Of course, I'm paying myself out as well. And not only that, but per your point about, like, let's say Joshua's like, I really want to do, Bomb and Gilead at La Jolla. And we help him figure that out. And maybe two people in the collective end up in it. They end up in it. What's cool, and he makes, $7,000 doing that. If a cut, maybe a cut goes into the collective, a very small percentage is paid out to the people. Maybe it's an honor system where it's like, this is how much I contributed to this. But then there's a larger cut that goes into a funding pool that, per your point, we can pull to create our truly collective projects. I'm just musing on. I don't know if anything,
Yeah.
but that's why making money is an interesting idea of what could potentially, so that it's not, because you're going to be interested in something, if you're like, I'm going to tell the story of, like, I'm trying to think something I would not be interested in, like, whatever.
A woman.
A woman. A woman being empowered. I'm like,
Yeah. So
I'm like, but yeah, in the CIA. No,
Mhm.
but then maybe, but I
Yeah.
show up and I
Yeah.
help you and I strategize.
I-
And I don't know.
Yeah, Joshua left because we started talking about women. I think that so here's my take on the money factor. I kind of think it's a very elegant, smooth thing to be like, these are the collective projects that we decided together to do. And that is what gets the money. And if we help each other out beyond that, like on our individual things, that's great, because it's like, I think of it like, you know how we pay property taxes, and those property taxes go to fund the schools, and whether you have kids in schools or not, you are going to fund the schools. It's like there is a benefit to children going through school and getting a good education. There's a benefit to the person paying property taxes, even if they're not the parent or the guardian, right? So that's kind of a clunky metaphor. But what I mean is, it's only good for our collective project that we decide to do together if Joshua has, a hit at La Jolla. Because why? And not monetarily, right? But if he has a hit there and he does really well there and he's part of this collective, it changes our context. It
I
makes,
completely agree.
and all of that, as you guys know, shifts over a career. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's you. Like everybody rises and falls, right?
Right.
And that like kind of I don't really want to use the word prestige, but like that kind of context for our careers at different times will benefit everybody. And I also have this belief that like, and I think you guys do too, that your money source needs to be diversified. Like that's why I'm saying like, good for you for having all these projects. That's exactly right. What else would you do? Like how else could you do
Yeah.
anything? So for me, it's not like, oh, this collective is going to be um the uh the replacement for institutional security. It's not that. It is just like,
Interesting.
here's a method that we could use now that who knows where it brings you. Maybe it's a one-time thing. I don't know. Or maybe if you got like, what I really like that you brought up was like these private small conversations. I think that's where it's at. I think like face to face, like, really digging in to like the real stuff with a small group
Yeah.
of people that you trust, that's a scene. And like that's what I like, that's like
Oh
my
yeah.
dream.
I
Yeah.
just want to be clear though about one thing, because I think what I'm actually I hear about the money in terms of like the delegating of money in terms of
Hmm.
project, but
Hmm.
part of what I'm saying is, well, what is the framing device? Because when when we are talking about getting the industry collapsing and our survivability and rebuilding of a structure, then if the framework was simply the goal is for the project to make money, not so much where the
Hmm.
money even comes from, but whatever the idea is then morphed and based off of the concept of it once distributed, whether it's through social media or something, whatever the hell it is, that it makes money. That to me is an interesting question because it asks about viability. But I also just want to acknowledge that it's also could cheapen creative work. If the independent artist is now is part of this collective with the just singular focus of seeing a return. Does this make sense, what I'm talking about?
I don't, but you're presupposing that the idea is to get a financial return in this scenario.
That it has
Yeah.
to.
I don't think it has to. I
Right.
think alignment is a long-term investment.
Right.
And I think it's what's that term where it's like the long horizon on something, like in investments and everything, like the short-term, long-term horizon. I think it's a long-term horizon thing. You align with the people that you truly align with. You make projects over time and it
Yeah.
compounds. And sometimes that's financially, sure. Sometimes that's in clout. Sometimes that's in connections to other things. Like this is kind of what we were talking about before, and I know we got to jump soon, but like this is kind of where we started the conversation, is like um the gripping of like guiding your career versus the flowing with it. Like I think this is a good kind of like
Yeah.
dynamic example of doing both. Okay, we're gonna create a container for us to collect our works and put them out and see what happens. And who knows, maybe it'll be financial gain, maybe it'll be something else. But it's hard to say. And like, that's why I think like if you're creating these labels and things, you need to have people you trust, right?
Yeah.
And good communication. Like there are all these skills you need to have to be able to do this. But I think like for someone like me who's like literally in my basement right now, um, like who's just constantly making stuff in this like hermetic state and like desperate
Yes.
to reach people, like I don't even care who or when, just like I'm just like I want to connect. Like this is so interesting to me as like almost like a practice more than a
Yeah. The thing that I first off, I agree with everything you're saying. And I think the combo, which is why low key, I know what I'm promoting literally is communism, but in a
Yeah.
way, which, but you know, it's like what interests me about this idea is everything you're saying about alignment, creatively about showing up, using it as first off, creating something that provides context. I am a part, you know, in my bio, like, you know, founding member of X, you know, and as that grows and as those things, you know, it grows a thing larger than myself. Why I am going to say, like, why I do think, like, if Joshua's bringing his La Jolla Playhouse project that none of us are working on, but he's bringing it to the group every week, and the group takes 5%. I think that goes more expansively in some ways, because part of what, because that provides a now it's providing even more of a of something that I do think it's a combo of structure and non-structure, right? It's like,
Mhm.
and if we're helping him, and our primary concern with him is to realize his creative vision, and for us to also contribute our ideas to the puzzle, but also like we are trying to figure out how it will make money so he can sustain himself. And that's in all of our collective best interests, because in addition to the company being lifted up, we also will receive, even if it's $3, some sort of financial return from it. That there's something, I'm wondering if it goes even more deeper than if it goes even more personal to an extent. If it's, you know, if it's even more you know, of a communist system in some respect. I'm just musing on that, you know. And is that how you sort of marry these two ideas? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I could say I actually don't know like the inner workings of communism that well. Believe it or not, they don't
Yeah,
teach that at the FBI.
yeah, exactly.
But but so I can't comment on the metaphor, but I I I personally think, because I like to do, I also like, I'm desperate for connection. I also want to do everything on my own.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what to do. Okay. So
Yeah. Yeah.
those are the two wolves inside of me. And there are probably 4 or 5 more that are all fighting each other. So I don't think of it as the way to get out of this mess. Right. But I do think of it as an interesting exercise and an interesting practice that could bring more life to me individually, could bring more life to the ideas that I really care about, could bring more life to the community and the collaborators and friends I
Yeah.
care about. And also like ultimately, you know, we're always talking about POV, like I don't know, like fix the world. I mean, it's big dreams, but like you know, I don't mean it in the sense of like, oh, this is the one way to do things. But if this is a way to give artists more agency and power and self-confidence in their work and the ability to try and risk things and
Yeah.
like move with a little bit more, you know, gumption, then like great.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. No.
I know. No, I totally agree. I love the idea. I think no matter what, just to be clear, the macro point is that we are needing to revolutionize how
Mhm.
we are moving forward in this next stage if we don't want to be essentially swallowed up in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. Period.
That's the question.
Yeah. That's the question. And we've answered it, so now we're all done.
Exactly.
And we're
You
all
guys,
out.
dang, wait, let me get back my. All right,
Yeah.
Get him back
Okay.
on.
get them back on. Can you see yourselves in the reflection of this?
Kind
Yeah,
of.
looks
You can
good,
see my
Josh.
Kind
light.
of.
Yeah. I can't stand this. Well, I don't know how you do it.
Why? Really?
It's just so dark. I'm always turning up the brightness on my computer.
Well,
and
I could do that. I
I'm
like to
40.
do the, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
do that.
But you guys, I am such big fans of your work. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and let me pitch you this idea that's not even mine. I just saw it on the internet and I was like, this is cool. And I want to talk to these guys about it because I just feel like you won't take you rightly investigate from all angles. And I love that about your podcast. I love that
Yeah.
about everything that you guys do and make. And I'm just a huge fan of both of you and of your collaboration together. So thanks for coming on. Can you guys tell people where they can find you and your Patreon and everything?
Onlyfans.com/fatboy boy toy.
That's it.
No.
Fat boy, boy toy.
Feet.
Yeah, all day.
No, you can find our podcast at Creative Risk Pod, which is where probably the best. And if you are interested from there, you can find our Patreon, which is just patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast. But go to IG or TikTok or YouTube at Creative Risk Pod to hear us babble on about more bullshit just like this that we love.
And you know, I know the feeling is you know the feeling is mutual, Courtney. This is
Yes.
you know, we're huge. We talk about you all the time, and I this conversation just really was important because I think you're asking the right questions, and I think that this collective idea, there's something to here because we can be hyper individualized in this moment. Regardless, we could be hyper individualized in this moment, or we can, you know, come together in some shape or fashion and use, you know, there's something to all of this, and I'm actually thinking about a lot of things right now, and so this is great.
Yay. Me too. All right, that's it for today. I would love to hear what you thought about this episode with Joshua Morgan and Mike Labbadia of the Creative Risk Podcast. Remember to follow them on Instagram at Creative Risk Pod and listen to Creative Risk wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you listened to this podcast episode on Substack, go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of our conversation about labels and collectives and how we move forward from here. And also, I do have one ask. When it comes to sharing this, I'd be so appreciative if you texted this episode to a friend, someone who you think might like this, maybe people who you want to put inside your own collective. Please send it their way. And as always, thank you for being here, for listening, and of course, for doing all the things that you do in the independent world. We desperately need your stuff, so I hope you will keep making it. All right, until next time, good luck out there.